Hello and welcome to another episode of Laptop Retrospective, and this one has been a long time coming. This is the first of a series of videos that I will be doing on the X1 series of ThinkPads. These showed up, earlier on in the 2010s and made a pretty significant impact not only for their performance, their durability, but also their size. They're pretty thin machines, and that was one of the things, is that it was supposed to be a thin and light ultrabook, pretty much to fly in the face of competition of, say, MacBook Airs and all of the other ones that were chasing this thin profile, and they were very successful in doing that. If we actually go ahead and measure the thickness of this machine using our caliper, at the fattest point, it is 18.67 millimeters, and at its thinnest point, it's approximately 18.60. So again, you're looking at under that 20 millimeter thickness. Pretty impressive indeed for a laptop like this. So a lot of things that came to the second generation machine were pretty significant updates. So it had the ability of using the ThinkPad dock, which is right next to the power port. And speaking of which, we should probably go through and do all of our ports here. We have full-size HDMI, we have mini display, USB 3, headphone microphone combo jack. On the other side, we've also got another USB 3, as well as the proprietary network ThinkPad dongle setup, and then our Kensington lock slot. So in terms of ports, it wasn't exactly a hit out of the park, but in terms of its size and its thickness, it packed a fair bit. One of the other things that this particular model, in fact, included was the WQHD IPS 300 nit color burst display, which also supported, I believe, 10 points of touch, which was a very, very good display at the time. It boosted a better battery life, and of course, what is now kind of the infamous adaptive row here. Now, I always like to point and say, they did it before Apple did, because they did. And to me, this was pretty cool. It was essentially a capacitive screen. It wasn't anything really fancy. And you can actually remove this thing without breaking it, which is a huge plus. You'll see that this one has discolored over time. A few of them have done that, so don't be too surprised if you open up your X1 Carbon 2nd Gen and find that. This also used what was called the adaptive keyboard, so they made some really interesting choices, like there is no cap lock key, it is home and end buttons instead. If you want cap locks, you have to double tap shift. Okay, the backspace and delete keys are kind of in a weird position, because backspace is normally like up there and deletes elsewhere. So this keyboard, people at the time either loved it or hated it, and there was really no in between. Some people liked where the keys were and they got used to it. Others were like, this is insane. If you're a programmer, you will hate the fact that tilde is down here. That will drive you probably nanners unless you learn the keyboard itself. And then of course we do have this really not so great spongy trackpad, but you've got track point, and so that's really all you're going to use anyway if you are a ThinkPad connoisseur. They also came with a fingerprint reader as well, and other than that, pretty well what you see is what you get. In terms of specifications, this one in particular, according to my spec sheet, is running the Intel Core i7 4600U, which is the top tier i7 that they put in these things. I'll list all of the other CPUs that were included as well. And your GPU is either an Intel HD 440 or 5000, depending on which one of the CPU configurations you got. The HD 5000 chip was only available with the i7 4550U, which is kind of an interesting choice, but there it is. The RAM was either 4 or 8 gigabytes and is soldered to the actual motherboard itself, so you're not changing that out. Your hard drive is M.2, so you can swap that out to whatever you like. The particular hard disk that is sitting in here is a decently, respectable size 240 gigabyte SSD, but from the factory there were a whole bunch of storage options available. Pretty much pick your poison on that. Anything as low as 128 all the way up to 512 gigabytes of solid state storage. So that's pretty much the specs on the unit. We've done the tour. Let's go ahead and flip this over and take a look on the inside. So accessing it is actually quite simple. There's just a series of screws around the edges in the back, and the whole cover is actually kind of a hinge plate. And you'll see what I mean when I loosen these last two screws, that the whole plate here will just kind of lean forward, which is really convenient because that means that you don't need to pick or release clips or anything like that. It just kind of springs. So you can just go ahead and pull the panel off, and here are our insides. Now there's some good news and there is some bad news. The good news is that anything that you would probably immediately swap out is here. So you've got your Wi-Fi and your solid state hard disk. In this case, it's a Samsung 860 EVO, and that's pretty much all you're doing to the inside of this. RAM is soldered onto the board, so you get what you get. It's not user replaceable. The keyboard replacement or the trackpad pretty much involves you removing almost everything out of the chassis. So if you are planning on doing maintenance to components that are on the other side, that is going to be a bit of a pain. But you have to look at the thickness of the machine. Compromises are going to be made. That's just kind of the way that it is. That being said, everything is laid out rather nicely. It is interesting to note that this speaker chamber here seems to be considerably more robust and larger than the speaker chamber on the, I guess what would be the left-hand side of the laptop if it was facing upward. The hinges are super durable looking, and the whole thing, of course, is in that magnesium roll cage that all ThinkPads are known for. So even though it is a thin unit, there is certainly a lot of durability and longevity to be had. And look at the size of this battery. This is a 45 watt-hour battery, and it takes up the majority of the machine, not only in size, but also in terms of mass. Really, that's all there is to say about the inside. So we're going to close it back up and then carry on with our walkthrough. Okay, so now that we have it all back together, let's go ahead and power it on and go through some of the more unique features. So as you can see, the bar has already lit up with the basic home row of function buttons. And there's essentially three sets of those buttons that you can go through depending on what application is running. So it was kind of ahead of its time, and can't argue with the boot time on that, by the way. That's pretty snappy. So let's go ahead and deal with these row of buttons first, and I'm just going to zoom in so you can get a much better look at what is actually happening here. So we've got volume up and down. If you tap the middle, it mutes it. Your screen brightness, and I gotta tell you, this screen it's gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. You've got a zoom key, or in this case, it'll search. Let's see what else we've got. That's our start menu. This is the snipping tool, which is kind of nice that it's got a dedicated button. Over here, we've got adaptive keyboard settings, so you can configure certain buttons, which is actually pretty handy. I'll just go ahead and slide this up here so you can get a better view. So you've got the cloud settings. Next time you press the cloud key, default application will launch, so you can change that, which is really nice. You can see the mode types. So you've got home, web browser, web conference. So if you're on a Skype call, that sort of thing. You also have a function row, again, pretty standard. So that's really, really cool. Voice recognition, of course, has not been set up for this because who cares? And there's also gesture control that you can do through the web camera, which is pretty neat. And the camera settings will optimize it for web conference. That's great. And then, of course, it will do some key mapping. So you can actually change your home or your end keys to cap lock if you want to not do the double tap shift. So even though they did set up the adaptive keyboard, if you mess around with the settings, you can actually configure it to more or less run like a regular keyboard, with the exception, of course, of tilde. That is unfortunate. But that is pretty handy that that is there. So if we tap our function key, it'll go ahead and change the row. So this is our web. And then if we tap again, that's our conference. We tap again, that's our function. And in this case, it allows us to activate the backlit keyboard, which, if you didn't know it was still an option, is actually kind of hidden. So let's dim the lights and see what this looks like. All right, now that we have our lights dimmed, we can see that this lights up very subtly. And if we tap, we've got 2 levels of brightness, which are very respectable and usable. So ladies and gentlemen, this to me is one of the most interesting ThinkPads that has been made in the last few years, and it's mainly because of this touch bar. I know that a lot of people didn't like it, but I actually really like this. If it had you know, a better trackpad scenario, and maybe if some of the keyboard keys were in a better location, I would totally buy a computer that had one of those again. I think that they really had something cool going, and given time, I think it would have really caught on. I know that some people would still prefer the tactile function keys, and you know what? You could probably do like a drop-in part replacement just for this piece that would give you a regular function row. So Lenovo, if on the off chance that you're ever watching one of these videos, I would encourage you to continue to explore this, because I think it is a really cool piece of kit. And just like all ThinkPads, this can lay practically perfectly flat. I don't know why you'd ever need that, but it does, and it's just awesome. And it's one of the main reasons that I wanted to start this series off with this unit, because to me, it is just so unique and it's so cool. And if you can find one of these, it is a pretty safe buy, even in the year 2019 when this is being recorded. It might take a little bit of getting used to with the keyboard layout, but the thinness, the power, the accessibility of basic maintenance of the parts, if you can get past some of its quirks, like again, keyboard, trackpad, and all that, what a fantastic machine. And you can normally find these, even bundled with the dock, between anywhere from your low $400 Canadian all the way up to $5 or $6, depending on how they're spec'd out. And it's a great buy. If you want something that's really light, and you're not worried about, you know, graphical performance and things like that, you don't mind the Ultrabook CPU, and especially if you can get it with the high-resolution touchscreen, to me, it's an easy machine to recommend. Thank you very much for watching. This video has been a long time in the making, and I really do appreciate your support and patience. I'm going to list the big 4 at the bottom. Please like the video, share it, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this in this series, and of course hit that notification bell to make sure that you are getting all of the information as soon as these videos are being pushed out live. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.